The desert wind carried whispers that night, sliding low across the cracked earth like it had something to confess, and Jacob Cole felt them crawl up his spine long before he ever saw her. Because men who'd lived on the frontier as long as he had learned to listen when the land spoke, especially when it spoke in fear. And Jacob had ridden through Apache territory before, had seen war paint, arrows buried in flesh, and towns burned to memory. Yet nothing prepared him for the moment his horse reared back, eyes rolling white, as a shadow rose from the moonlit rocks, like a living legend clawing itself out of myth. Towering, impossibly tall, a silhouette shaped like a woman, but built like a mountain. 7 feet of muscle and sorrow wrapped in torn buckskin, hair black as a raven's wing spilling down her back. And when she stepped into the open, her face shattered every story Jacob had ever been told, because she was crying, openly, violently, tears cutting pale trails through dust and blood on her cheeks as she raised her hands, not in attack, but in surrender, and her voice broke the silence like thunder splitting stone when she said, "Don't be scared of me," in broken English learned from pain, "please, don't run." And Jacob didn't move, not because he was fearless, but because something ancient in her eyes stopped him cold, something that looked like a child left behind by the world. And as the wind howled between them, memories flooded his mind of warnings whispered in saloons, of Apache giants who crushed men with bare hands, of demon women born of curses. And yet here she stood trembling, shoulders shaking, her massive frame bowed like she carried the weight of the sky itself. And Jacob's hand hovered near his revolver before slowly falling away. Because fear didn't live in her eyes, grief did, and that frightened him more than any weapon ever could. The moonlight revealed scars along her arms, old knife wounds, bullet marks, lashings from ropes, a body shaped by survival rather than violence. And when she took a step forward, the ground seemed to answer her, weight with a dull thud that echoed through Jacob's chest. Yet she stopped herself as if afraid her presence alone might break him. And she whispered again, voice cracking, "They all run, or they shoot." And something inside Jacob shifted, because he had shot men who cried before, men who begged, but no one had ever begged him not to be afraid. And in that moment he realized the stories had never asked who she was, only what she was. And the night seemed to lean in closer as if listening, while Jacob slowly dismounted, boots crunching against stone, every instinct screaming at him to flee, while another, quieter voice told him that if he did, she would shatter completely. And when he finally spoke, his own voice surprised him with its steadiness as he said, "I ain't runnin'," and her sob broke free like a dam bursting, a sound so raw it stripped the breath from his lungs, because this was no monster's cry, it was a woman's pain laid bare beneath the open sky. And she collapsed to her knees with a force that sent dust spiraling upward like smoke from a dying fire, bowing her head, shoulders heaving, whispering words in Apache Jacob didn't understand, but felt in his bones, words of apology, of shame, of exhaustion. And as he stepped closer, carefully, the way one approaches a wounded animal, he saw her hands shake like leaves in a storm, hands that could snap him into yet trembled as though terrified of their own strength. And she confessed between sobs that her name was Naya, that she had been born wrong in the eyes of her people, too large, too strong, cursed by spirits they feared, that children screamed when they saw her, and warriors challenged her to prove she was not a demon, and that when white men came, they did worse, capturing her as a curiosity, chaining her, forcing her to fight for their amusement, until blood soaked the dirt and laughter followed. And Jacob felt something burn behind his eyes, because he'd ridden past those camps, heard rumors of giant savages, never once asking what truth bled beneath the spectacle. And when Naya lifted her head at last, eyes red and shining, she said the words that would haunt him forever, "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be left alone." And the silence that followed was heavier than gunfire, because the frontier was built on men taking what they wanted and calling it destiny. And here was a woman who wanted nothing but peace, yet had never known it. And Jacob understood then that the choice before him was not whether he feared her, but whether he would become like every other man she'd met. And as the wind shifted and coyotes howled in the distance, he made a decision that would change both their lives. Kneeling slowly in the dirt, so he stood eye to eye with her despite her towering height, lowering himself not in submission but in respect, and said, "Naya, nobody's ever gonna chain you again." And the way her breath hitched, the way disbelief flickered across her face like a dying candle catching flame, was the moment Jacob realized fear was a learned thing and courage was a choice. And as the night stretched on, two souls stood at the edge of a story bigger than either of them. A story the world would never tell unless someone dared to listen. And if you're still listening right now, dawn came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness what the night had forged. And Jacob Cole realized he had not slept at all, sitting by a low fire while Naya remained a few steps away, curled into herself despite her enormous frame, arms wrapped around her knees like a child bracing against a storm. And when the first light touched her face, it softened the harsh angles carved by years of cruelty, revealing something achingly human beneath the legend. And Jacob understood then that the hardest battles were never fought with guns or fists but with trust, because when he offered her coffee she stared at it as though it might explode, flinching when he moved too quickly, apologizing even when the wind startled her. And he saw how deeply the world had trained her to believe she was a mistake. And as they began walking together through the canyon, Jacob leading not because she needed protection, but because she needed reassurance, rumors traveled faster than horses, and by midday they heard them, men, voices, laughter sharp with cruelty, hunters from a nearby settlement, the same kind who spoke of bounties and freaks and trophies. And Jacob felt Naya freeze behind him, her breath turning shallow, fingers digging into the rock as if the earth itself were the only thing that might hold her together, whispering that they would hurt him, that they always hurt anyone who stayed. And Jacob knew fear then, real fear, not of her but of what men did when they believed themselves righteous. And when the hunters emerged, guns slung low, eyes lighting up at the sight of her towering form, the air shifted, thick with anticipation, and one of them laughed and said he'd heard stories but never thought they were true. And another raised his rifle not to aim but to admire, already imagining the tale he would tell. And in that moment Jacob stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them and Naya, feeling absurd and fragile and utterly determined, declaring she was under his protection. And the laughter turned sharp, mocking, accusing him of betrayal, of lying with savages, of being weak. And Jacob felt the old frontier law tighten its grip might makes, right, yet behind him he felt something change as Naya straightened, towering over him, her shadow falling across the men like a coming storm. And she spoke, her voice steady now, carrying the weight of 1,000 silent nights, telling them she would not run anymore, that she would not be hunted. And though her hands trembled she did not raise them in violence. And the men hesitated because courage born of cruelty always falters when confronted with dignity. And when one fired anyway, the shot tearing into Jacob's shoulder, time fractured, pain exploding white-hot. And before Jacob hit the ground, Naya caught him with a gentleness that defied her strength, laying him down as if he were glass. And then she rose, not as a monster but as a reckoning, disarming the men without killing them, snapping rifles like kindling, lifting one by the collar and forcing him to look at her not in terror, but in shame. And when it was over, the canyon echoed with nothing but ragged breathing and the sound of men fleeing from a truth they could not stomach. And Jacob lay there bleeding, stunned, watching Naya press her hands against his wound, sobbing apologies, begging him not to die. And he laughed through the pain, because for the first time in his life he had seen true strength used not to dominate but to protect. And as days passed and she nursed him back to health, something extraordinary happened, because word spread not of a demon woman, but of a giant who spared lives, of a cowboy who stood unafraid. And travelers began leaving food at the canyon's edge, then notes, then children's drawings. And Naya wept over each one, learning slowly that the world could change when someone chose compassion over fear. And when Jacob finally healed, he asked her what she wanted, truly wanted. And she said she wanted a place where no one would flinch at her shadow. And so together they built a refuge deep in the red stone, a place for the outcast and broken, where sighs, scars, and sorrow meant nothing. And Jacob would tell visitors the truth, that the most dangerous lie ever told was that some people were born monsters, because monsters are made, forged by cruelty and silence. And Naya would stand beside him, no longer hiding her tears, no longer apologizing for her existence. And if you're still here, still listening, remember this story didn't survive because of fear or violence, but because someone chose to stay. So if you believe stories like this deserve to live on, subscribe, share the fire, and carry this legend forward, because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for the world not to be scared of them.
Subscribe to my channel.